Curious mind hungry for knowledge, we've got something for everyone. Also, feel free to introduce yourself in the comments section below. Let us know what subjects or topics you're interested in, or if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. We're all about creating a vibrant learning community here at StudyPH74.
Ancient and Early Medieval India. Chronology: 2600 to 1700 BCE Harappan Indus Valley Civilization. 1700 to 600 BCE Vedic Age. 1700 to 1000 BCE Early Vedic Age. 1000 to 600 BCE Later Vedic Age. 321, 184 BCE Mauryan Empire 2nd century BCE to 3rd century CE Kushan Kingdom. 320, 550 CE Gupta Empire. 600 to 1300 CE Early Medieval India. 1206 to 1526 CE Delhi Sultanate. 3.2 Introduction, a political overview. Our knowledge of the ancient world has been radically altered by impressive archaeological discoveries over the last 2 centuries. Prior to the 20th century, for instance, historians believe that India's history began in the 2nd millennium BCE, when a people known as Indo-Aryans migrated into the Indian subcontinent and created a new civilization. Yet, even during the 19th century, British explorers and officials were curious about brick mounds dotting the landscape of northwest India, where Pakistan is today. A large one was located in a village named Harappa, see figure 3.1. A British Army engineer, Sir Alexander Cunningham, sensed its importance because he also found other artifacts among the bricks, such as a seal with an inscription. He was, therefore, quite dismayed that railway contractors were pilfering these bricks for ballast. When he became the director of Great Britain's Archaeological Survey in 1872, he ordered protection for these ruins. But the excavation of Harappa did not begin until 1920, and neither the Archaeological Survey nor Indian archaeologists understood their significance until this time. Harappa, it turned out, was an ancient city dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, and only one part of a much larger civilization sprawling over northwest India. With the discovery of this lost civilization, the timeline for India's history was pushed back over 1,000 years. The Indus Valley Civilization, 2600 to 1700 BCE, now stands at the beginning of India's long history. Much like the states of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, the foundations for that history were established by Paleolithic foragers who migrated to and populated the region, and then Neolithic agriculturalists who settled into villages. During the 3rd millennium BCE, building on these foundations, urban centers emerged along the Indus River, along with other elements that contribute to making a civilization. This civilization, however, faded away by 1700 BCE, and was followed by a new stage in India's history. While it declined, India saw waves of migration from the mountainous northwest, by a people who referred to themselves as Aryans. The Aryans brought a distinctive language and way of life to the northern half of India and, after first migrating into the Punjab and Indus Valley, pushed east along the Ganges River and settled down into a life of farming and pastoralism. As they interacted with indigenous peoples, a new period in India's history took shape. That period is known as the Vedic Age, 1700 to 600 BCE. During the long course of the Vedic Age, states formed in northern India. The surplus from farming and pastoralism allowed people to engage in a multitude of other occupations and made for a lively trade. Villages thus grew in number and some became towns. Consequently, there was a need for greater leadership, something that was provided by chieftains of the many Aryan clans. Over time, higher levels of political organization developed, and these chieftains became kings. or the leaders of clan assemblies. By the end of the Vedic Age, northern India was divided up by 16 major kingdoms and oligarchies. The ensuing 3 centuries, c. 600 to 321 BCE, were a time of transition. These states fought with each other over territory. The most successful state was the one that could most effectively administer its land, mobilize its resources and, by so doing, field the largest armies. That state was the kingdom of Magadha, which, by the 4th century BCE, had gained control of much of northern India along the Ganges River. In 321 BCE, the last king of Magadha was overthrown by one of his subjects, Chandragupta Maurya, and a new period in India's history began. Through war and diplomacy, he and his 2 successors established control over most of India, forging the first major empire in the history of South Asia, the Mauryan Empire, 321 to 184 BCE. Chandragupta's grandson, King Ashoka, ended the military conquests and sought to rule his land through Buddhist principles of non-violence and tolerance. But after his time, the empire rapidly declined, and India entered a new stage in its history. After the Mauryan Empire fell, no one major power held control over a substantial part of India for 500 years. Rather, from c. 200 BCE to 300 CE, India saw a fairly rapid turnover of numerous, regional kingdoms. Some of these were located in northern India, along the Ganges River, but others grew up in the south, the Indian peninsula, for the first time. Also, some kingdoms emerged through foreign conquest. Outsiders in Central Asia and the Middle East saw India as a place of much wealth, and sought to plunder or rule it. Thus, throughout its history, India was repeatedly invaded by conquerors coming through mountain passes in the northwest. Many of these, like King Kanishk of the Kushan Empire, c. 100 CE, established notable kingdoms that extended from India into these neighboring regions from which they came. Even after 300 CE and up to the 15th century, India was never again unified for any length of time by one large empire. For that reason, historians highlight those kingdoms that became substantial regional powers and contributed in other important ways to India's civilization. The period 300 to 600 CE, for instance, is often referred to as the Gupta period and Classical Age. The Guptas, c. 320 to 550, were rulers who forged an impressive empire in northern India. As their empire flourished, Indian intellectuals were also setting standards for excellence in the fields of art, architecture, literature, and science, in part because of Gupta patronage. But important kingdoms also developed in South India. The last period covered in this chapter is early medieval India, c. 600 to 1300 CE. After the Gupta Empire, and during the following 7 centuries, the pattern of fragmentation intensified, as numerous regional kingdoms large and small frequently turned over. Confronting such an unstable and fluid political scene, medieval kings granted land to loyal subordinate rulers and high officers of their courts. The resulting political and economic pattern is referred to as Indian feudalism. Also, kings put their greatness on display by waging war and building magnificent Hindu temples in their capital cities. And, during the medieval period, a new political and religious force entered the Indian scene, when Muslim Arab and Turkic traders and conquerors arrived on the subcontinent. This overview briefly summarizes major periods in India's political history. But the history of a civilization consists of more than just rulers and states, which is why historians also pay close attention to social, cultural, and economic life every step of the way. This attention is especially important for India. Although the Asian subcontinent sees a long succession of kingdoms and empires and was usually divided up by several at any particular point in its history, peoples over time came to share some things in common. Socially, the peoples of India were largely organized by the caste system. Culturally, the peoples of India shared in the development of Hinduism and Buddhism, two major religious traditions that shaped people's understanding of the world and their place in it. Finally, throughout the ancient and medieval periods, India flourished as a civilization. Because of its dynamic economy, the peoples of India shared in that too, and that meant they were linked in networks of trade and exchange not only with other parts of South Asia but also with neighboring regions of the Afro-Eurasian world.